everybody. So I was here last year. Justin was kind enough to invite me, and I was just 5 months into this job. Was anybody at that? Does anybody remember me from last year? A few people. Okay, I asked that for a very specific reason, and that's because I'm going to kind of go over a little bit of what I talked about. Let me get myself off the screen. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I talked about last year, but just since there was not that many people there. My background is not in television at all, so everybody in this room knows more about television than I do. So that's my disclaimer. However, I grew up in the digital world and spent the last 2 decades running digital media businesses and building technology and data platforms in the digital world. And so I came over to then NCC about 18 months ago. We rebranded as Ampersand at Advertising Week in New York just this past September. And we were, does everybody know what ampersand means? It's basically the connection of 2 things, the symbol and we purposely chose that name because our history, the history of what was NCC, is actually all about collaboration. So all this session is really in the DNA of what our company is. So who we are, because in Europe you might not have heard of us. We are owned by Comcast, Charter, and Cox. So it's a joint venture in the United States. But we represent the inventory, and I'll show a slide in a second, of all the major MVPDs, satellite, and telco companies. So Dish, Verizon, AT&T, Xandr, and all the major cable operators. That gives us a very unique view into the television marketplace in the United States. So we represent a reach of 85 million households in linear television, nearly 40 million households in addressable television. So the most substantial addressable footprint in the United States. And we also, over the past year since I was last here, pulled together the set-top box and viewership data across the 3 owners. So that gives us set-top box data insights and ad exposure data into 38 million households as well. So it's a really substantial data set. And that's where my background in digital data transferred into television, because effectively I used to run data-driven digital media businesses. And the playbook is very similar to what we're trying to do in television. So this idea of convergence of the digital worlds and the television world that everybody's been talking about is really, really true. My belief, and I talked about this a bit last year as well, is that it will take the knowledge base of the television veterans in combination with the knowledge base of the digital veterans coming together in organizations, because what we found at Ampersand is it's the combination of both of these talent sets that are actually driving the marketplace, because you need a little bit of both. And so our team actually is sort of half digital folks and half TV folks working together in a room trying to come up with solutions, and that's sort of how we've built our technology. So this is who we represent. It's a really significant footprint. Very notably, we're one of the only companies in the United States that could sell across all of the networks in the United States. So rather than selling one cable network, we sell across over 120 networks across the entirety of the United States. Why does that matter? That matters because audience-based data targeting is coming more and more to the forefront in television. And we know that the best way to buy television is not based on age and gender, but on much more rich data. With the set-top box data, we have access to that, but you need a broad base of content in order to target on audiences most effectively. So not only our broad reach from a geographic perspective, but also depth of content is really what I think our superpower is in the marketplace. What are buyers asking for? And this is, I came out of WPP, I was there for over a decade. TV buyers are asking for what all buyers want, right? They want better data for targeting purposes. They want us to make it easy. One of my biggest takeaways when I first got to this job is, and please don't take offense to this, I think digital players, all the big players that everybody's been talking about here, they make it so easy for buyers to buy media. They have a very simple, pretty interface. You're able to transact big swaths of money very, very easily without friction through a single data set against a lot of supply. there's a lot of demand, a lot of supply, a data set in the middle, and some ID layer underneath so you can frequency cap, et cetera. That's all the digital players did. I mean, that's really what they did. They made it so easy, and that's what drove their growth. And I worked with them very closely when I was at WPP. That's what drove their growth. I have not seen, now there's platforms being built, but there's no platform like that in television yet. Like, we're getting there. We're getting there. There's demand side technologies that are doing and supply side, but we're still not connected enough to drive that kind of scale seamlessly in television. So it's a lot of what we're working on, and others. So on our side, what we've built out is 3 components of a platform. So we have define and find. So how do you find your audiences based on the data set that we pulled together? Planning and executing. So once you have your audience set up in the platform, hitting a button and be able to actually execute on all the supply that I showed you before across all the networks in the US. And after you run the campaign, measure and attribute that campaign. What digital did, and what I was guilty of this, is I used to walk into advertisers and say, hey, TV can't prove their worth to you. I could show you a report at the end of the campaign and show you how many conversions you got, right? And that's what all the big platforms are doing, but TV actually has the ability to do that now based on the types of data sets that we have, right? And so we need to do this more, and we need to do it very seamlessly so that it quickly can feed back into future campaigns. Does that all make sense? So this is what we're building out across screens. The other thing that I would say is that when people say television is dead, I think everybody in this room would agree it's not. But the definition of television, we're getting ourselves into a hole by not redefining what television is. TV is not, as we know, about the big screen anymore. But the ability to connect audiences across the screens is very, very difficult, as we all know. One of the things that we need to do is work together, because the reason that our superpower is actually in the collaboration of all of our partners, because we couldn't do this with any one of the partners I showed you up there. So if you're an individual content provider, it's very hard to get this kind of scale that I'm showing you now, both from a data set perspective and from a content perspective. And it's the collaboration across all of us that actually enables us to go from linear all the way down to highly targeted addressable, which is where I want to go next. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we're doing in addressable television specifically. I'm going to kind of zero in on that. The reason I gave you that front part of the presentation is because I wanted everybody to understand the scale that we have, and that's the only reason why I could show you everything I'm about to show you. If I was on just one piece of the puzzle that I showed you on the supply side, I couldn't do the type of work we're doing for clients at the scale that we're doing it at. The type of learnings we're getting is simply because we have the scale to do it. That's all, right? We need the 38 million households in order to zero in on the addressable side. Okay, so somebody mentioned this. I think Ryan, did you mention this number? Somebody mentioned it. So the addressable spend, so it looks like a big number until you actually see that it's only 3%. This is a US number, so I apologize. 3.7% of total TV spend. Very, very small, right? Doesn't seem very meaningful. But I would say actually that addressable television, we talk about it and it's like the shiny new toy, but addressable television should only ever be a component of all television buying. We should not go all in on addressable, because then if you don't fill the funnel in the broad reach of television, you can't get to the bottom of the funnel in addressable. Does that make sense? So this is a piece of the puzzle, and I want to show you very specific use cases that we've done. So here's an example. This is a real client. It's a financial client. So they did a national buy, the national networks in the United States. This is what the reach is, so high reach curve, but you see it kind of, it levels off as the weeks go on of the buy. This is what happened when we added addressable. Incremental reach goes up significantly, right? Again, going back to the scale, we couldn't do this on a small footprint. It's only because we have the footprint across a scale that allowed us to do this in the market. This is another example. So incremental reach. So again, the blue bar is a national buy, national linear buy on both sides. If you add on the top bar, if you add, this is the same amount of dollars. The green bar is the same amount of dollars. We did a test with one of our clients. This was an auto client. We said, hey, test case 1, add an incremental X dollars. I think it was $1 million over like a quarter. Add $1 million to linear national network television. And you see the incremental opportunity there. Same amount of dollars on the bottom using data and addressable, same amount of dollars. So it has a use, right? But I would say, like, if we took all of that money and just put it all on addressable, we would not be better off. Too targeted is not good. You need the national reach and then the incremental reach on top of it for audience extension. Here's another example. So in network buys, national network again, so if you are trying to reach an audience, you could see you only hit, if you want to reach an audience 1 time per week, you actually only hit them 61%. 61% of your audience, right? So you lose out there. If you want to reach them 3 times per week, you're only hitting 17% of your audience. That's not good either, right? Because besides just spend, you want frequency in some cases, depending on what your goals are. So what we're able to do by adding addressable to it is get it 3% additional, so 5% incremental reach on TV extension, and then nearly 20%, 18%, if you want to reach them 3x per week. So these are all different use cases that we're using around addressable television. This one is actually my favorite. So, ooh, I didn't mean to do that, sorry. Can I go back? Perfect, okay. So this is a very interesting use case. So this is revenue. This is revenue produced from campaign. So you have 15.5 million. That US only on the left is linear, right? And an incremental, almost $1 million when addressable is used as a tactic, okay? But the households that had both linear and incremental addressable, there was a $13 per household uptick in revenue from that particular household. So the combination of the two was actually the magic, right? You could say an incremental $1 million on just addressable is great, but addressable actually informed a significant amount of the linear campaign as well, right? So it's the combination of both. So from an addressable perspective, what we're finding is, A, you need scale. So what everybody's been talking about across all of the panels and the presentations is true. Individual content owners, it's very difficult to get the kind of scale to produce these sorts of results. In the US, I know even the largest provider wouldn't be able to do it at the scale that we're doing it, which is why we're doing it with all of our partners. But you can find underexposed or unexposed audiences entirely and also drive a lot of incremental spend for the buy side by all working together on the supply side. Do I have time for questions or do I stop? How does it?
Probably not.
Okay.
I'll be yelled out if I say yes.
Okay, no problem.
You will be hanging
Thank you,
around,
everybody.
right? You'll be hanging around.
I'll be around, yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.